You're listening to Good to Grow, a podcast for budding green thumbs. We'll dig into the fun, frustration, and science of growing your own food and flowers in Alberta. For even more tips, join our Facebook community, AMA Good to Grow.
Hi, I'm your host, Sandra Spironis. On this episode, we'll learn how to grow a new generation of green thumbs. Gardening, as many of you know, is a rewarding experience. Getting your children involved is even more so. Teaching kids about gardening at a young age helps them learn about the importance of local food while spending some quality time outdoors in the fresh air. Claudia Bolli is a coordinator with Sustainable Food Edmonton. It's a nonprofit organization that builds communities around urban agriculture. She hosts garden clubs for kids and teaches children how to grow food in their own classrooms. Welcome to the podcast, Claudia.
Thank you.
So let's start off with your own journey. How were you introduced to gardening as a child?
Actually, I grew up on a farm, so food growing was part of my family's day-to-day activities. And so gardening was also part of that, although we actually did a lot of weeding, but we helped, sort potatoes that were harvested off the field and helped with, all kinds of harvesting. So that was always just what we did on a seasonal basis.
So when did your passion for gardening really blossom?
I think it was once I was moved into a home after university where we actually had a yard. And I had, sort of kind of gotten used to grocery store food, but that kind of farmer came back out in me and I had to start a garden and then never looked back. I always continued wanting to grow my own food.
How did you get involved with Sustainable Edmonton?
So at some point, there was an ad for a volunteer to help with this project called City Farm, where we would try and connect kids with food growing and adventure play and exploring all kinds of different activities outside. And so I became involved with Sustainable Food Edmonton that way and eventually became one of the program coordinators for basically a school program out at an outdoor site near Riverman Gardens in the northeast Edmonton. And we also started up Little Green Thumbs for more of a winter program, indoor gardening type of program.
And can you tell me a little bit about that Little Green Thumbs program?
Yeah, certainly. Things changed quite a bit with the outdoor aspect. We eventually weren't able to continue that, but Little Green Thumbs has been going since about 2007, 2008. So over 10 years now, and we have 55 schools that have an indoor garden in a classroom. And so kids start growing their seeds sometimes in October, November, and other teachers, they start their gardens after the new year. And they grow veggies under a grow light in earth boxes and grow boxes. And so it's a really nice way for kids to learn about the connection of food and learning how to grow plants and just do some taste testing and nibbling. And really the teachers make it work for many different subject areas. They use the garden in many, many different ways. And so my role is to help with, any gardening advice, but also the materials and equipment and that kind of thing.
Right. What other kind of benefits does gardening provide for children?
It is just a really great way for kids to learn about nature cycles, the life cycles from seed to harvest and all the critters that are involved within that realm of the natural ecosystems and the cycles.
What are some of the experiences that you gain personally from teaching kids about all things growing and gardening?
One of the really important aspects when it comes to food actually is we all know that a lot of folks don't necessarily eat as healthy as they could. And one of the important things would be to increase their vegetable and fruit intake. And so for children to be part of the growing cycle is really such an important early and easy step for them to taste more different types of vegetables and just becoming normal that it's part of the meal and a good portion of the meal can be vegetables and fruit and just to, experiment and develop a taste for different things and also connecting to the wider world of food production. So learning about farming and learning about the producers and the gardeners in the neighborhood that grow the food that they eat. So it's really important to the food connection, but then also about learning about the ecosystems that sustain all of us, whether it's the water cycle. And even so many kids are afraid of bugs of different kinds, but when they are engaged in gardening activities, there is a more natural sort of relationship that they've developed with the earthworms and the bees and, the different bugs that might be beneficial or that maybe we don't really want to have in the garden. So again, it's about connecting kids with the wide world of the ecosystem that sustains us.
What kind of vegetables and plants do you grow with the children?
So it's really just kind of unlimited. It just depends on what families enjoy. Kids always like carrots. They sometimes like cherry tomatoes, some don't, but it really is about exploring what kids might like. Peas are always a favorite. And then it can also be about interesting shapes or things like squashes or pumpkins. And of course, then the creativity of the cook also comes into play. So what you do with it, if a zucchini isn't necessarily to somebody's palate raw or fresh, well, it can be made into muffins or grated into pancakes and that kind of thing. So really, there are many, many different choices for vegetables that grow well in Edmonton or in our province. And then it's kind of see what fits each other's palate.
What advice do you have for parents who want to introduce their kids to growing veggies, plants, and flowers?
So I think it is a good idea to kind of follow along with the seasons or try to find connections to different seasons, because there are times when there isn't that much to do in the garden or there isn't a whole lot happening, but there's always something interesting outside, right? There's always something interesting that can happen, whether it's in the backyard or on a nature walk or in a park. So it can start, of course, with starting seeds inside. And, for younger children, bigger seeds are really helpful, like the beans and the peas, even nasturtiums or sunflowers. And then, plant a little bit of extra and always be prepared that, some things don't work out. And even as a very seasoned gardener, there are always some things that don't do well or some complete failures as well. So we just plant a little bit of extra and accept some of the losses. But, then it comes to at some point in, May, June, we plant outside. So it could be transplanting seedlings from the inside to the outside. And or going to a garden center and selecting things that the kids like and planting them into pots or into the garden, into a garden bed. And then at this time of year now, as the season progresses, we need to start thinking about supporting plants. And so there's many different ways we can do that. We just had this heat wave. Well, one of the ways to protect plants, if we were not off camping like myself, would be to make sure that there's some mulch around the plants, so that could be dry leaves, maybe some wood chips. Straw can work really well in veggie gardens if you have access to that. And some of the plants need, some staking, so bamboo sticks or twigs that have been collected on a nature walk. So beans, peas, they can benefit from some supports. And then we also need to look at, again, the watering. How can we maybe set up some water barrels and have some fun playing around, with sprinklers and especially when it's hot. And think about other creatures such as the bees and the birds. Do they have the water that they need, right? So we could set up a bird bath or just a shallow dish and keep water in it and some rocks so that the birds or the bees or other insects can land on the rocks and not drown in the water. Even just putting a piece of plywood underneath an outdoor tap and letting it just drip, drip, drip a little bit, that can be a sort of a damp spot where bees and butterflies can go and get some water. And again, when it's super hot and we want to be maybe lounging a little bit outside in the shade, are there things like a hammock that would make sense to put in the garden or a reading corner? And maybe the kids just want to play and set up a little fairy garden or a little water feature. I have a small sort of a fish pond or aquarium, an old aquarium bowl that I'm not using for fish anymore, but I placed some stones in it and a little bit of a gurgling kind of water feature with a solar panel. So it's just a small water feature you can set up and take down easily. It's nothing permanent. And so really just setting up a nice space in the yard or even on a balcony where, a person can lounge and just enjoy being outside.
Do you have any advice for parents who are in small spaces like patios?
Yeah, actually, with patios, of course, you are definitely limited. And some annual flowers are wonderful, like easy to grow marigolds and things like cosmos or petunias and things like that. One of the activities I've done with kids, as flowers are already in bloom, and when it can be quite hot, would be to create a magic potion, right? So to collect some flowers, maybe go for a nature walk, and if there's still lilacs blooming or something like that, just pinching off little samples of some of the wild plants, could be even dandelions, and putting them in a jar with water and then shaking them and see if some of the smells transfer into the water, and that can be poured into a spray bottle and we can spray each other just for keeping cool, right? So it can be just using some of the material, whether it's from a few flowers and just picking a few samples, or when we go for a walk and then using those plants for, like I said, a magic potion or a spray, or then, pressing them, gluing them onto making cards, or also if you lay flower petals on a piece of wax paper and then place a piece of fabric on top, you can gently tap with a hammer and that pigment from the flowers will transfer into the fabric, and you can make like bookmarks or little flags or something like that. So there's many things we can do. We could, from edible flowers such as borage, we can take the flowers, put them in an ice cube tray and add water and then freeze them. So again, we're using some of the garden produce, even though it's not veggies, but we are using the plants for some fun or even a drink or activities.
Right. How do you keep kids from getting discouraged when gardening mishaps happen, like a plant that doesn't produce or a flower that dies?
Yeah, and I mean, that, again, happens to all of us. And so it's really important to, talk about it as not being the gardener's fault necessarily, although sometimes, of course, that can happen. We are forgetful. But that there are many factors, and that some plants, just maybe didn't even get a really good start. The seed wasn't as strong as some other seeds, and then it maybe didn't get to all the needs met. So we have to accept the loss, but we can basically give the plant back to the earth by composting it if that's possible. And just, talk about it as being part of the natural cycle.
Are there easy veggies or fruits that kids can get into growing for the first time?
I think it kind of depends a little bit too on what parents feel comfortable trying out. Again, beans, once it's warm and in June, they usually do really well. A little bit earlier in May, the peas can do really well. But it's a little bit about experimenting with diversity too. Like, as said, I grow a lot of different things, and there are sometimes complete losses of one particular type of maybe last year the peas did really well and this year they didn't. So it's just trying a few different things and accepting that not all things will work out. You can buy lettuce seedlings at garden centers, or again, big seeds like peas and beans are easy to start from seed. And then plants like sunflowers are easy to grow. And while they're not a vegetable, they're really beneficial for the pollinators, and the seeds can be collected for eating later on. Cherry tomatoes, some of the very dwarf cherry tomato plants are great because they fit into small pots and produce cherry tomatoes really quickly. Things like spinach and radishes are a little bit more tricky. So sometimes beginner gardeners want to grow those, but they might be best off left for a little bit later on once gardeners have more experience.
And what's the best way to continue your children's gardening adventures over the fall and winter months?
In terms of the fall, of course, there may be some harvest. Hopefully there might be some harvest, but even helping to do, there can be scavenger hunts looking for animals, maybe starting to prepare for winter or looking to collect food for the winter. We can help to prepare the garden for the fall and winter. Actually, even late fall can be a good time. There's things like planting garlic, planting tulip bulbs, and doing some composting. That's a great time. Collecting leaves to use in the compost throughout the winter, and even spreading leaves on some of the garden beds. And then, kind of protecting plants for the winter season. If there are small berry bushes or fruit trees, we want to put a wire cage around them so that the rabbits might, or even some of the voles don't damage any young kind of plants. So kids can be helping with any of that as well. And again, if it's not presented as a chore, but an opportunity to help the garden get ready for winter, then hopefully the kids would be interested in helping out and just letting them play in the leaves or, making some mud pies or something fun like that as well.
And in terms of the winter months, would you recommend trying indoor gardening with your children?
Actually, the city has had a bit of a winterscaping contest. And so there has been an encouragement for Edmonton families to get out into the yard and create some interesting winter landscapes with snow, or using colored water like a spray bottle, or even freezing colored water into shapes like in buckets or yogurt containers, and then creating some kind of a statue or some kind of a sculpture. So as an adult, we might think about what does the landscape look like in winter, and are there certain things we could add if we don't have too many plants already. But things like tall grasses that we can leave standing and they sway in the wind, and just, even when we have snow, they look interesting. So there's, of course, a whole sort of field of landscaping for winter as well. But really just finding ways to look what's going on in the yard in the winter, or hanging up seed treats for the birds, or interesting kind of ice sculptures, as I mentioned as well, to make the landscape more interesting.
Thank you, Claudia, for joining us on Good to Grow.
You're most welcome.
Claudia Bolli is with Sustainable Food Edmonton. It's a nonprofit that supports projects and programs that help build communities around urban agriculture. She also hosts garden clubs for kids and helps get children excited about gardening in the classroom.
Growing your own food or flowers? Drop us a line at goodtogrow@ama.ab.ca. We might feature you in a segment we call The Plot Thickens.
This segment is all about you. We want to know what you're growing, what gardening means to you, or any questions you might have about growing food and flowers in Alberta. In this installment of The Plot Thickens, we hear about an Edmonton gardener's battle with beetles.
Hi, I'm Alana Dahlen of Edmonton, and I'm at war with the red lily beetle in my garden. I have several different types of lily plants, and 2 years ago, I didn't get to see them bloom because of this red beetle. I'd never seen it before, so I did some research on it and found out the only way I could potentially save my plants was to dig them up and split the roots and make sure that there were no beetles on the roots. So that's what I did. Last year, in order to make sure that my lilies actually bloomed, I went out every single day and would pluck 2 to 3 of these beetles off of my plants and kill them. I was very fortunate and only lost one plant which had some eggs on it, so I had to take the leaves with the eggs on them and put them into soapy water in order to prevent more beetles from surviving. But yeah, that's my issue in my garden, is my battle with these beetles.
Thanks, Alana. On next week's episode, we'll talk more about red lily beetles with master gardener Donna Balzer. Share your gardening adventures or questions with us, and you might be featured in an upcoming installment of The Plot Thickens. Send an email or voice recording to goodtogrow@ama.ab.ca. Thanks for listening to AMA's Good to Grow podcast. I'm Sandra Spironis. Happy gardening!
Good to Grow is produced by the Alberta Motor Association. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For even more gardening tips and tales, join our Facebook community, AMA Good to Grow.